Because the first couple of times I'd say anything like that, people were like, okay, check this guy off the list. You know?
I've just outed you.
Yeah.
I thought, you'll never work in this town again.
I'm done.
Yep. Crash and burn before my eyes.
Geez.
Hey everybody, how are you doing today? Welcome, this is Keith Billick, and you have chosen to listen to this episode of the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast, which, in case you can't tell, is a podcast only about banjo stuff. So, if you're looking for a podcast about absolutely anything else, you have come to the very wrong place. When I was first researching names for this podcast, and I came up with Picky Fingers, I would Google it just to see what else is out there. And mostly what else comes up under Picky Fingers has something to do more or less with like kids being picky eaters, and they have picky little fingers that they eat their chicken nuggets with or whatever. But this is not that. Here, we eat all of our vegetables and we only talk about banjo stuff. That's what we do. Not only do we talk about banjos, but we talk to banjo players, and today you're in for a real treat because the guest for today is Greg Cahill, and he's really one of the stalwarts in the banjo and really the larger bluegrass world, and we'll get to his credentials in a little bit. First of all, the typical stuff that I have to always say at the beginning. If you want to support the podcast, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/banjopodcast and donate money to keep the podcast supported that way. Other than that, you can support it just by telling all your friends, or at least any of them who would be interested in knowing about the podcast. And let's face it, if you have friends who aren't into banjos, they're not really worth your friendship anyway, so you can get rid of them. So you can spread the word about the podcast. You could also subscribe and rate the podcast on iTunes or whatever other platform you're on. And that all helps get the podcast recognized and lets me know that you're enjoying it. And that is pretty meaningful to me, and I enjoy that. Another way to get a hold of me is to just email the show directly, which is pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com. And I say it every time, but I enjoy hearing from you. Just recently, I've heard about people who have found banjo teachers because of the podcast. Davy Jones, who I interviewed in episode number 1, there was someone who tracked him down and is now taking lessons just because of that. There's also people who have heard things that some of the interviewees have said that raises questions in their mind that maybe didn't get covered quite as thoroughly during the interview, and they wanted that to be covered on future podcasts. And I think that's all great ideas because it's not necessarily things that I would just think about on my own. So I really appreciate you helping me out with that. So once again, that's pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com. So today we have a conversation with Greg Cahill. Now, Greg would be a really well-known banjo player even if all he ever did was play in his band. His band, of course, is Special Consensus. They are a Chicago-based bluegrass band. They've been around since 1975. Greg is an original member of that band. They've come out with about 19 recordings, some of which have won IBMA awards. I know there's at least one that was nominated for a Grammy Award. So they're just a very established, well-respected bluegrass group, and they've been around for a long time, and they deserve a lot of the respect that they get for that. Greg himself is also single-handedly responsible for a lot more, or rather, he deserves a lot of credit for spreading the word about banjos and bluegrass. He served as the IBMA president, that's the International Bluegrass Music Association president, for several years, and that organization its main mission is to spread and maintain bluegrass music. He teaches out of the Old Town School of Folk Music in Chicago. He's released a number of instructional DVDs and books. He's been involved in getting traditional American music programs started in schools. So it's often these young school kids, their first encounter seeing fiddlers and banjo players and mandolins and actually getting spoken to about what this music is all about. So he's done a lot for the banjo and for bluegrass music. The latest release by Special Consensus, it's an album called Rivers and Roads that was just released this year, 2018, on Compass Records, and was produced by yet another great banjoist, Allison Brown, who is the co-owner of Compass Records. So that's bound to have some great banjo music on it. One other quick thing I want to make sure that I mention, there's a segment of this interview in which Greg starts talking about a specific track that he recorded on one of his solo albums and talks about some mandolin playing that Jethro Burns did. I'm not going to spoil the content of his story with that, but just to clarify, we're both talking and he can't remember quite what the name of that track was. Well, I tracked it down. The track in question is called Sherwood Square, and it's from his solo album called Lone Star. So any of you who would like to track that down after hearing the sound snippet that occurs in the interview and hearing him describe how it was recorded, feel free to do that. I believe it's only available on LP, though, so you will have to be turntable equipped, or I think you can listen to it on YouTube as well. But that's Sherwood Square is the name of that song. So I believe that's all I have to say for now. I hope you enjoy soaking in all of the banjo wisdom that Greg has to offer. So here we go, the conversation with Greg Cahill. Yeah, let's not get the lights too dim in here. Save up on some sleep.
It's quiet,
while we can get
and comfortable. That's right.
It is. So, Greg, thanks for joining me, man.
Oh, glad to be here.
How are you?
This will be fun. Everything's good.
Cool.
Yeah.
So this is actually not the banjo that I expected you to have. I feel like I've seen some photos of you recently with one of those Czech-made banjos. Do you play one of those?
Well, interestingly enough,
is that
Chopik, yeah. No, but we're friends.
Okay.
And Ned and I just were over in Prague.
I think that's
for
what
Rasta's
I'm
wedding.
thinking of.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so there were a couple times that those of us who played other banjos did play his banjo, one of his banjos. You know, we did a concert. It was real. I don't know. Should I start babbling about this?
Yeah, babble away.
All right, I'll babble. Rasta Chopik, makes really good banjos, and he and his now wife, Eva, have been together for years, but they decided to get married, and they decided they do promote concerts over there in Prague at this big theater, and we had played that. I had played that with Special C, and at the Kaufman camp actually, we played. I think it was Gary Davis and Ned and myself. And we played, did a set with just his banjos, you know.
Okay.
So they looked at who was going to be in Europe at the time that they were going to get married. And so they pulled together this, it turned out to be a really fun band. It was Peter Rowan and Ned Lubrecki.
And that's his wedding band, as it turned out.
Yeah, it
that's
turned
really
out.
cool.
We did a concert the day before, 2 shows.
Very cool.
Sierra Hull, Martino Capo.
Wow.
Rob Ikes, Trey Hensley.
So that was just a big coincidence that you were over there anyway, they were able to attend.
They pulled people from wherever, and I was teaching at the Bluegrass Camp, Germany, and so I came from there, took the bus to Prague, actually, from Munich. And so that's where you saw me playing that.
Okay.
At the show, I played at least a couple tunes on one of his banjos with Ned, because Ned endorses those banjos.
Yeah, he has his own model and everything
model,
like that.
So he is actually the only guy who actually came over for that show. Everybody else was already in Europe. So
yeah, well, that worked out really nicely.
Yeah, it was great.
More people than you could probably reasonably expect to just end up in the Czech
Really?
Republic.
Yeah.
Offhand, yeah.
They had a Czech bass player, and I'm terrible about it because I can't remember his name, but they also had a guy named Radim Zenkel, who's a phenomenal mandolin player.
Yeah, I'm familiar with him.
He played didgeridoo for one of the songs.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Angeline the Baker.
Didgeridoo.
Angeline the Baker on the didgeridoo with Ned on banjo and Martino on mandolin. It was really cool.
Yeah, that would be a first.
Yeah.
So what is this instrument that you have with you then?
This is one, actually, that I found in a pawn shop about 30 years ago, 30 years ago. It was a tenor banjo. It's a Kel Croydon made by Gibson at the time for their lower level model, and it had the tenor neck, and as you can see by some of the wear marks, I'm sure somebody played Dixieland music and sat hunched over like this for a lot of years because
strumming away.
It was the fingerboard on the tenor neck is all scooped out behind the frets. I mean, somebody really played it.
I love that. A lot of those old country guitars, you can tell whether they played in E or G most often because of where the divots are.
Where it is.
Yeah.
So I actually it sat down in my basement office for 7 or 8 years because I was agonizing over whether or not I was going to put a tone ring in,
Okay.
Because,
Greg
Smith has a great one. Yeah, you do a little bit, and everybody, there's some of the ones without the tone rings sound so good. But then I thought, well, I play so many festivals where sometimes the sound isn't so great, and at least sometimes a tone ring brings out more sound when you need it. So this now has a Yates tone ring in it and a Frank Neat neck.
Wonderful.
And it's a 1935, and it's been broken once or twice by the airlines, but it still survives, so it's good.
But you don't regret having it customized to what you actually needed to do, I take it.
I really don't, I have an old 3 that I recorded with for a lot of the Special C recordings and actually some of my own things. And so we have a new recording out called Rivers and Roads, and it's the first one that I use this banjo on. Just the guys in the band love the sound of this banjo, just the tone and the
And everything else has
volume.
Been your style 3 up until that point.
Pretty much.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, early on, we've got 19 recordings, so early on, before I had any kind of banjo like that, I had, Gibson copies a lot and a few different models. I played a Pruka from
speaking of the
Czech Republic, and I played a Huber, and I still have a Huber and a Pruka, and they're great banjos, and I had a Stelling, and so on and so forth. But back to the old Gibson here,
Yeah, wonderful. How'd you get started with these things? You're a Chicago guy, pretty through and through, right?
Yeah, and a lot of people wonder that, but after World War II, a lot of the folks from down south moved up to Chicago for jobs, right?
Same thing with Detroit.
Yeah, same thing. And they had a huge theater. George D. Hay came to Chicago and started the WLS Barn Dance, right? Sponsored by Sears, the world's largest store. So, and it was so popular, people packed it out, stood for blocks even in the cold weather to get in. And that's how Homer and Jethro moved to Chicago, was to be on the Barn Dance. And Bob Atcher and all sorts of great singers and players. And then he moved to Nashville and started the Grand Ole Opry after that. So there are all these people who love country music. There were great players who lived there. Right. Not necessarily bluegrass, and I wasn't hearing so much bluegrass back then. But I played the accordion actually as a kid. And it's the classic, I fit the joke, I played the accordion and decided to move on to the banjo to make more money or more popularity or whatever you want to call it. But
perhaps the funniest thing about that is I was just talking to Alan Mundy, and he played the accordion too, and I actually own an accordion also. And I think I said something about all we need now is some bagpipes.
Yeah, okay.
And we'll just be the most hated musicians of all time.
We should.
That's really funny.
Yeah, Alan and I end up rooming together sometimes when we need to have roommates at some of these camps, and I think we should bring our accordions sometime and just have a little.
Do you even know that about each other, that you're fellow accordion players?
No. No,
going to all the accordion camps, they could really double your potential jobs.
Oh, gosh. Well, my mom was a great kind of honky-tonk style piano player, And then, so our family gatherings always had music. Everybody around the piano singing and playing, and my sisters played the piano, and one sister played the accordion. But it was like my high school graduation is when Pete Seeger and especially Kingston Trio and all them, that was that era, the late 60s. Yeah. And this guy had a 5-string, and he was just strumming on it. I just thought it was so cool. And then when I went to college up in Minnesota, got into Pete Seeger, got the 12-string guitar, the 6-string, the long neck banjo. And then Dave Guard was my hero, with Kingston Trio. Yeah. And then, Beverly Hillbillies hit the TV waves, airwaves, and there it was. I was like, oh my gosh. And so I was in this folk trio with a guy and a girl, and we'd play like Shakey's Pizza Parlors when we were in college to make spending money. Yeah. And then the guy came to my dorm room one day and was like, man, you got to hear this. And it was like, how many guys are playing that banjo? It was it was the Foggy Mountain Banjo album.
And you thought it was...
It sounded like
no way one
3
guy
guys,
could,
So that pretty much did it. I just was eaten up with it. And And then I got out of school and went into the Army for a couple of years and came back in 1970 and went back to Chicago. And I was married by then and had a little son and was trying to learn how to play the banjo and the University of Chicago Folk Festival would bring in all these great old Stanley Brothers. They had Flatt and Scruggs, who I never saw there. It was before I was aware of what was going on there. Yeah. But just some great, the Pinnacle Boys, and Ola Belle Reed playing, her style. And so it was all great. And I met the guys that we formed Special Consensus with just picking in the hallway at the University of Chicago Folk Festival and was listening to records and trying to slow them down and figir out what was going on.
That's how you were learning, just by listening to as much as you possibly could. And
there was a guy in Chicago named Richard Hood who's living out, I don't know if it's New York or Pennsylvania, somewhere now. But he was a great player, and he played with a band called the Greater Chicago Bluegrass Band. And I took a couple lessons from him, and he advised me on good, recordings to listen to and to buy and to try to play with. And then I started going to bluegrass festivals with him, on the weekend. And boy, when you go to a bluegrass festival, especially back then when they were, most of them happened in the summertime, and there weren't that many, and so when you went, it was like mind-boggling,
These are my people.
Yeah, good. And became a huge J.D. Crowe fan, addict. And
was he your main early influence? Earl, obviously, you already said that you loved him. But I
loved Earl. Well, it was interesting because at that time, Earl was the man, but Crowe had just this distinctive tone and the way he twisted the licks around, and it just, wow. And at the same time, Newgrass Revival came out, and they were killer. And I was listening to Courtney Johnson, with all what they call the chromatic stuff,
Yeah. Were you trying to do that too, or did you stick pretty? Okay.
I probably did more of that before I really worked on. I mean, I was always working on the Scruggs stuff, trying to figure it. But because I ended up living maybe 3 or 4 blocks from Jethro Burns. And so I would see him at the music store, and then we became friends, and I got to play with him quite a bit. We'd do festivals and sometimes even travel together, and or shows. We did a couple places. We do the same show every year, and did several of those in Chicago with him. And he was just a great guy. He was like sort of like the godfather, but the mentor for everybody.
Okay.
He would just,
everyone looked up to him.
Totally. That's how, guys, people would come into town to play, and they'd go see Jethro, Sam Bush, David Grisman, everybody.
And you were playing the more swing oriented material with him,
because that's the stuff. Well, we were playing bluegrass, but we'd throw in some swing songs, and that's the stuff like that I had heard and played on the accordion growing up. You know, and so I'd ask him. He'd say things like, well, when you had a melody, if you could maybe put the melody on the top string, on the outside string, and build a chord. And you only need a couple of fingers, to build the chord. Just interesting stuff to get those passing chords, and it was just great.
And that was what he did for people, even on an instrument that he doesn't play, like the banjo. He at least had enough awareness of how it worked to
he would
give you some tips.
Yeah, if you'd ask him, and just, hey, what do you do with the melody? And so he was just, and the music just poured out of him. He was he was kind enough to play on my very first solo recording, which was 1980.
Wow. Okay.
In Chicago, and we went into a studio, and he played on it. The guys in the band at the time, Mitch Corbin, a guy named Mark Weiss, Mark Edelstein, another co-founder of the band, the bass player, and Byron Berline came in and played on it.
Yeah, that's quite a group.
Oh, man. And we had a great time in the studio, and Byron came in on a Monday, and because we played in town one Monday a month at a club called Minstrels for about 7 years, because you could catch touring musicians in between. They'd play for the weekend, and usually they went, so they'd hang out, and they'd come in, and people would come and sit in, and it was great. But I know on one of the cuts, the guitar player's friend, Mitch's friend, had written this tune, and I just thought it was a great tune that he could play on, it just sounded like a good fiddle tune or whatever. So we played it, and Jethro, we all played it, and Jethro played it, and said, man, that was great. And he said, well, yeah, but I'd like to just take another run at it. I said, no kidding. Geez, you killed it. It was so easy. So this was before all the multi-tracking. So I said, okay,
So that
sure.
means another live take for everybody. It's not just him.
No, we could do it with him.
Okay.
But like I said, okay, I just got to run to the bathroom. And I ran into the control room and said, God, can you put him on another track, or what can you do?
Yeah.
Back then,
they
and so he did, and we did that. And he played it, killer again. So then we went in to mix it. And we played the one solo, then we played the other one. I was like, oh my gosh, play them both at the same time. And he had played like a perfect counterpoint twin part to himself.
Wow.
With that was his second pass, without even thinking about it. I mean, it just...
So you left them both in?
Yeah. Yeah. It was like just the music just poured out of him.
What tune was that? Do you remember?
Oh, I can't remember. I can't remember the name. I should have thought of that before I came to see you, but
that's okay.
I can't remember it. But
I'm sure Google will know.
Yeah, it's the only one on there with Jethro playing 2 tracks.
Okay,
something
to listen for.
I can't remember. Yeah,
that'd be fun to track down. So Special C had been going for a while by that point. Right?
No, we actually we sort of started like it was 73, 74, we would play, and we'd play for parties, and then a friend would say, come over here. And then we decided to try to play some of the clubs in town, and we did. And then Mark Edelstein, the bass player, and I thought, well, we're just so eaten up with it that we were all like college and or graduate students at the time, so we all had a lot going on, but just wanted to play. So Mark and I decided in 1975 we'll just do this for a couple of years full time, and the other guys couldn't because one guy was finishing his doctorate and one guy was
life reasons.
Yeah, life reasons. So that's when we became Special Consensus and started touring. But we really sort of had the name Special Consensus for maybe 6-8 months, maybe 74. But we hadn't been touring or anything. So it was 75 we became full-time. We quit our day jobs. And
I forget where I heard this, and maybe this is untrue. Does the name Special Consensus have something to do with like a peyote experience? Am I making that up? I feel like I've heard that before.
No.
It doesn't?
Well,
I got that from somewhere, right? I can tell by how you're...
it's pretty on, actually.
Okay.
I was reading these books by Carlos Castaneda called The Teachings of Don Juan. And he went and this was the early and mid 70s. And so he went to live with the Yaqui Indians, and evidently this became his dissertation. But he was trying to see how they had this real spiritual side, these Yaqui Indians, and it was very powerful, the energy with that. And so he went and lived with them and participated in some of those peyote sessions, but eventually, you get beyond that, and you don't use peyote or anything like that, and you can get to this very intense spiritual place. They had white magic and not so good magic, but in the definition of terms, in the first book, he wrote many of these books, but this was the first book called The Teachings of Don Juan. The space where this really positive and intense spiritual space that you can I can feel in my head, I feel like you can. That's what banjo players are talking about when you put the banjo right there, and you can just feel when you're connecting with the instrument.
Yeah,
and a guitar. I mean, any instrument really. But banjo players, because of the resonance of the banjo and the resonator, seem to really
there's
be able
more
to,
physical.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so there's this intense spot like that, a kind of a spiritual, and then when, in the physical world, things are working for you, or when you're playing music especially, you're really connecting. And that the definition of that spot in this book, The Teachings of Don Juan, was called Special Consensus.
Wow. That's very, very heady, a lot deeper than most of your River, Mountain, Valley Boys, or whatever your standard bluegrass names were.
But interestingly enough, in a lot of the interviews up until fairly recently, people would ask where the name came from, and I would just say, well, we all came from different musical backgrounds, and it was kind of, because the first couple of times I'd say anything like that, people were like, okay, check this guy off the list.
I've just outed you.
Yeah.
I apologize. You'll never work in this town again.
I'm done.
Yep. Crash and burn before my eyes.
Geez.
So you guys have had quite a career. How many years is it now?
Well, this is 2018, year number 43.
Wow.
And I think we have our 40-year anniversary T-shirts, and every 5 years we we update it and have a big reunion show, And most of the people come back, and the show consists of everybody who's played on a recording to play some songs from the recording with the people who played on the recording originally. So on the back of the T-shirt this year, we always list the names of everybody who's been in the band up to that point. I think Nick, actually, our most recent addition, which is almost 3 years ago, he joined us on mandolin, Nick Dumas, and I think he's number 41.
Okay.
So
almost a one per year
kind of
correspondence. Yeah. That's got to be really challenging, especially because you're not necessarily a frontman vocalist.
Not at all.
Type of performer.
No, I just play the banjo, and I sing some baritone parts. So you have to find good singers and good players, and I'm real fortunate right now because Rick Ferris, our guitar player, was our mandolin player for 6 years, then moved to guitar. So he's almost 9 years with me now, and that's a pretty good run, in the world of bluegrass. Yeah.
And have you found that you have a band sound and you try to hire people based on that, or has the band sound changed as you find different players you like, and that just happens to be what the new band is? Or do you have a sound in your head that when you hire people, that's what you're going for?
It truly is all of the above. Mm-hmm. So I have been fortunate in that when people know we're looking for somebody, they have been listening to Special C, which is often the case, which is great because they kind of like the band anyway. They know what kind of material we've done, and they know it. Sometimes play it with their bands, So if they're familiar with the material at all, it's really helpful. And then we try to keep the songs in the repertoire that have done really well and that we get requests from all the different recordings. Yeah. So we go back pretty far in the recordings with a song here and a song there. And, of course, you play the newer stuff, more of it. But the sound sort of stays similar. I think I'm hearing the band as really being in between the real traditional bands, which we're really not. We're not from, well, some of us are from the parts like that, but, and some of the, what you would call, I guess, more progressive bands. So we just try to play good driving bluegrass music, but with songs and material and themes that might be more current for our life situations, and for the world today. I think then we've come up with, 19 recordings. Rivers and Roads is number 19, and on 2 of the recordings we repeated a few of the songs. Our 25th anniversary recording, we did like half songs from out of print recordings, and then the other half was new
versions
songs.
Of them.
Well, some of them were taking the old tracks and putting it on.
Put them right on there.
But then do new songs with new versions.
Okay.
And
gotcha.
So I did a 25th anniversary, and then one called 35, but that only had maybe 5 or 6 of the old ones on there. And it's been great having Allison Brown be our producer, and label owner, really. She and Gary West own Compass Records.
Right.
But she's just great. So she brings out the best in us, and been really fortunate that some of the great songwriters in the world of bluegrass music and country have given us really good songs,
As a banjo player, what kind of things does she tell you? Or can that be disconcerting at times, having someone like her listen to what you're doing? You're a great player yourself, so you don't have anything to worry about. But
no, it's great. I'm always learning, lots from so many of the great players. But especially when we're in the studio with her, it's funny because we'll play the tracks and run them down.
Yeah,
and then She's just got the she has this perspective, which we've all adopted, I think, in our own way individually as well, where you just take every song in and of itself as this is the album. Mm-hmm. So we're not, if there's a song that feels like a quote filler song, then we don't do it, you know. So we just really think about the arrangements. We sit around a table, have a cup of coffee, and we sit there.
This is the band with Allison involved.
Yeah. So actually, to the point that we stopped really rehearsing songs very much that we were going to do, the new songs, before we went in, because they didn't even come close to coming out the way we envisioned them. So, for example, on the new recording, the song, the John Hartford song, Rivers, Way Down the River Road, it's in the key of B, and we had sort of decided that and who would sing lead. And as we sat around the table, put together the pieces, and then the speed got bumped up, and it became, okay, let's make this really fast. Okay, yeah, we'll do that, and we had it. And then we were walking in to the studio, and I think that's my phone.
Oh, is it? Okay. I didn't know if it was people outside the door. It's okay.
Okay. Hello? No. I thought I turned it off. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So we were getting ready to go in and just run through it, you know, as we walked into the booths and the rooms in the studio. And she said, oh, you know, she had just gotten this Julia Bell, the model of the John Hartford. That was her thing with Deering Banjo. She helped them create that model, and it's a low-tuned banjo. And I've played several songs on the recordings since we're with Allison in F on a low-tuned banjo, hers. But this was the new one that really sounds real low-tuned.
Is that an F or is it an E?
You can tune it. I actually...
Either one. But.
Yeah, you can. I tuned it in F for the F songs, and it sounds really great. So I'm walking in, and she said, well, hey, maybe we could use this band. I was like, yeah, you know, that would be really great, and it's a John Hartford song, so okay. Yeah, so it's all set. So now we're going in, and it's in B, and I'm trying to figure out, wait a second, how am I going to tune this? As I'm walking through the door, she says, oh, yeah, try it in D tuning, but in B. And I'm like, what? you know, just crazy ideas, you know.
Talk about being disoriented.
Yeah. Right. So I just figured out the tuning that was going to work, and we just played it, and it just sounds so different, you know, and it was just a different take on it. That's just a tiny example of the kinds of things, you know, we think about. We bring in other people, just number one, like we did a John Denver tribute recording, and just because we thought he was a great songwriter. Yeah. And we wanted to do his songs in the bluegrass style. And then just brought in different friends and people because it was the year, what was the 50-year anniversary of the Circle album. So we thought, well, what if we did this tiny, tiny, tiny little version of that with friends in Nashville of John Denver songs, you know? And we had a great time. And we're just trying to make the music as good as we can, and something that we hope people would enjoy. And,
for sure.
And most of them we can still, you know, we don't do too many songs that we can't reproduce on stage. We might not have the fiddles or the dobro or whatever, but we can still play the song, you know.
Yep.
And that's really opened the horizons, I think, for us, just how we think about each song and how we select our material. I mean, that takes forever. I mean, we're starting to listen now. We record every 2 years, and this thing just came out March 30th.
As soon as you're done, you start work on the next one.
Yeah, trying to find the right material, you know. That's a hard thing. And we write some of the stuff, too, but it's hard to really zero in on the stuff.
In terms of your own banjo playing through the years, how do you see your style fitting in? Like, what sort of influences have you had, or what sort of things did you work on that helped you come up with how you play or how you approach the music?
Well, a lot of it has to do with that drive. I'll say that, just that crow sound that we all have in our ears, you know, all who play. It's just, and as he always said, the distance between the notes and that kind of thing, you know, so the right hand and just working on playing cleanly I think and that's part of the thing when I'm teaching. I just think if you play 3 songs really well and really clean, it's way better than saying I can play 50 songs
but not
that aren't so good.
Not so great.
Yeah. And the swingy stuff has always been a thing that I really like. And I mean, it's just what I kind of grew up with, and ended up playing the banjo. But I mean, I love Blue Ridge Cabin Home, and I love that, even the slow song. I mean, I love bluegrass and the hard traditional stuff. And then I like, the swingy stuff fits very well, I think. It's just,
right.
Got a few different twists and turns. But
when you have students and you're trying to teach them the drive that your ears think is the right way to play, how do you tell them to get that? What can they do?
Well, obviously you start with those roll patterns, but you need to really, every note counts, and the sound of every note. Just that.
Yeah.
And if you start doing that with a metronome very slowly, see that? Very slowly, and just bump it up a couple notes. But really, so that every note sounds the same. And then as you start doing, your slides and your hammer-ons and pull-out, everything, get right behind those are supposed to be 2 notes. And I think people fall into the trap of, it's just and it's...
Yeah.
So when we're learning it, I'll show them, okay, here's what you're playing. Those are 2 notes. And
really
that's
getting
what
them to hear it. Yeah.
And that's a big thing. And even just playing Cripple Creek, people say, oh, geez, yeah. But, that has everything in it. Mm-hmm. It has the timing. It starts on an offbeat, right? 1, 2. And right there, those are 2 notes. People are doing that. And sometimes they throw their timing off before they've even hit the song, It's just that. So it's that kind of thing where you really pay attention to every note and what's there. And I think if you do that and just build on the rolls and the slides and the pull-offs and do a tune or 2 and just work through it. And it's actually fun. It's more fun because you can feel that it's right.
It's more fun to sound better.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And
you're not kind of sneaking through it, it's sort of, but now I understand the desire to be able to play right now. I understand that too, because I played for a couple of years and had to start over. I had my hand position all wrong before I saw Richard, because I was just guessing on really how to...
What were you doing, or what did you...
Oh, I had my pinky on the top of the bridge and only anchored that, and I was wobbling all...
Okay.
It was just... There was no way you could really play cleanly enough.
And I imagine you were muting the sound a bit by doing that too.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, Crow helped me out a lot with just saying, hit the string in the middle of the pick. Get the full sound of the pick. If you hit the string just on the front edge of the pick, just the tiniest bit. Now, if I turn that pick from there to in the middle, listen to it's a drastic dip. It's a drastic difference.
So just for people listening, what you mean by the middle of the pick is like a squared up...
Like a mental image of your finger pick is at a 90-degree angle with the string.
Right.
And
rather
when
than along the edge.
Right.
Of
Not
the
you
sides
don't want
of
the
pick.
front edge is what that's the common thing.
Yeah.
So, and that changes your hand position because if you try to... So I always suggest put your fingers on the string, put your middle finger on the first string and index on the second, and you can just rub them up and down a little to feel that whole entire pick is on that string. And then you put your thumb on the 5th string, you can feel the same. Thumb is hard because sometimes your thumb bends in a little.
Yeah.
And if you want to really get the full... I had to really work on that, hold my thumb so I could really get the full pick.
The meat of the pick. The blade.
Yeah.
Right.
And then I put my 2 fingers down.
Right, getting that angle right actually dictates where the rest of your hand should be.
It really does. And where your wrist should be, too, It changes your wrist position, too.
Yeah.
So those are little things that, boy, it took me a long time to figure out would make it a lot easier to play well or cleanly anyway,
Given that Special C is known more or less like a traditional band, I know you said you straddle the line, but you still play the traditional festivals. Mm-hmm. given that, you actually do quite a bit of single string playing. You do quite a bit of chromatic type playing. At least I think you do.
You kind of intersperse it a little bit.
Right.
I look at it as seasoning.
Where did you pick that stuff up from? Just from hearing more guys play, or from these swing players who you played with?
Yeah, I think so. I do. I've done a lot of playing with my great friend Don Stiernberg, who was the protege of, so to speak, of Jethro. He definitely had his own thing, and he's a master of so many different instruments. And
Don
especially, he's a great guitar. He's played everything in Special C except the banjo.
Oh, wow.
He's helped us out on bass, and he's played fiddle with us.
Okay,
and he's
I didn't
played
realize
mandolin
that.
and guitar.
That's great.
Jethro was also a great guitar player.
Okay.
Really great guitar player.
Doesn't surprise me.
So I think, just being around, you just get a different sense of harmonization. When we were in the studio, Don and I, when Jethro passed, we did a recording that the intent was to be kind of half swingy and half bluegrass, which it sort of was. It was all instrumental, and it was a tribute to Jethro. Mm-hmm. And so we went in to do Blue Skies, and for example, and Don said, well, tell you what, why don't you start it? And I was like, I'm learning this from you guys. I'm sitting in the studio. Right. No. Here, you know the chords. Here's the chords. And so we did a chord chart. Yeah, okay. And then he said, well, he was going to take the first solo. So he said it'd be kind of cool if the banjo just kind of did something. And I was like, oh my gosh. Well, let's see. And it starts on an E minor. And then, and so the jazz guys would just run the E down. And so that's what I did. And that's how that whole How did I do it now? Oh, yeah. And that's where that came from. Yeah, it was just that. And you put a roll around it. Mm-hmm. So that's, again, a minute example, but that's the kind of stuff you get hanging around with guys like that, Just
pick up a little idea.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize that was on the tribute to Jethro. I do own the disc titled Blue Skies that you did with
that's it.
Don.
No, we didn't call it a tribute. That's the one I'm talking about.
Oh, gotcha.
On the inside of the thing, we dedicated it to Jethro.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm with you now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's neat. Some more banjo geeky stuff. What else do you have going on? I know you have that Kelkroyden, you said it was a Yates tone ring, mm-hmm. and what, a neat neck?
Frank neat neck, yeah.
Okay. What else are you partial to? What are you using for a bridge and strings? And
well, that's interesting too, because I've changed. I have a few bridge, like this one is from Silvio Ferretti.
The Scorpion bridges.
Yeah, the Scorpion. And I like the Huber bridge, and I like the Moon bridge mm-hmm. that Deering has. I had that, and I got that on a couple other banjos. And a guy named Wadsworth made a great bridge, makes a great bridge. This reminds me of one time John Hickman and I were buddies, and he's over with Byron Berline in Oklahoma. He's ill now, but he was the repair guy there at the Double Stop Fiddle Shop in Guthrie, Oklahoma. And so I went up to the shop one day, and we were visiting. He said, how you fix for bridges? I said, I'm pretty good. Oh, okay. And he opened up this massive drawer that was filled with bridges. And I think banjo players tend to do that. You kind of accumulate, and you try this and you try that. And this week, this one sounds really right. And then sometimes I'll leave it on for a couple of years. But they do kind of move around a little. They bend a little. And
they can warp a little.
Yeah. So this one has a Scorpion bridge on it. And
so you're not necessarily tied to any one thing. You just go with what it sounds. Fresh sound every now and then.
Yeah.
That's
Pruka
cool.
makes good bridges too.
Does he? Okay.
Yeah.
I've not tried that.
Yeah. And I've been endorsing GHS strings, gosh, for a long time, probably 25 years anyway. And so I use them and have gone through the different gauges. When I started and I said my hand position was all wrong, I'd be playing so hard, and I was using medium gauge strings and breaking them, at least one or two a set. And then I went to all straight light gauge, 9, 11, 12, 20, 9.
Yeah.
And that was good. Now I kind of like either the 9.5 or the 10. Right now I've been, they have the J.D. Crow stage set and the Crow studio set. But I like the 10, 11, 20. And the third string, for a while I was making up my own sets using a 13. But it's a little thicker. I like a lot of bending on it. And yet the 12, I just kept pulling out of tune. So this new... Relatively, no, it's not new, but they call them custom lights for GHS, and it's, I think, PF 155 because it's 10, 11, 12 and a half, 20,
Ooh.
10. And that little half made the difference for me, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't quite pull it out of tune as much, but it doesn't feel quite as stout.
Yeah. When it's a little lighter, that's where you want to have a lot of those snappy pull-offs, too.
That's
so
right,
it helps to have them a little lighter.
Yeah, exactly.
For that kind of playing. What about microphones? How much do you know about that, or how partial are you to this or that, or do you just kind of use whatever somebody throws in front of you?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, I'm not a techie guy, and I should be, because most banjo players now are. I think in the studio, what have I oftentimes used? It's not a 4033, but it's sort of like that.
A condenser.
Condenser. Oh, yeah. I think, I can't remember the last one I used, but condensers and different, and a placement makes a big difference too.
Right.
So on stage, I try to usually place it right by the strings, actually, maybe in front of the bridge. Yeah, most people go down lower.
Right, that's what I would do, but
and sometimes I do, but I just seem to get a fuller sound. If I stand away, I don't try to get right on top of the mic. So if I'm, 6-8 inches away from the mic, but with it sort of aimed at the strings, seems to work for me.
Get a full sound and are still able to control your dynamics a bit.
Yeah,
moving in and out.
Still move in and out. Yeah. And I back way off usually when I'm playing backup. I mean, I can walk around really because you can hear the banjo through the other mics, on stage. So as a support thing, and the styles have changed too, including mine, I think, over the years, because before, when you were backing up a fiddle or a mandolin, you did some of the driving rolls, but there was a lot of comping or chopping or whatever you call it. And now there's less and less than that. There's some players who hardly ever will hit a chord to comp. They're always rolling, and that's what the band wants, to keep that.
Do you find yourself doing that regardless of what the lead instrument is? Even under a mandolin, you'll keep rolling?
Yeah, sometimes. But I kind of intersperse it. I might go to the next chord and chop and mix it up a little,
Yeah.
But that's interesting, just listening to, Scruggs was comping all the time, Crow a whole lot of the time. But if you listen to Aaron McDarris, say, with Rhonda, he rolls a whole lot of the time.
And you think that's just a modernization taste thing?
Seems that way to me a little bit, Sammy Sheeler, he rolls a whole lot of the time.
Yeah.
Most of the time. So, yeah, it's just interesting.
That is really interesting. Is most of your time split, is it more teaching now than performing, or 50-50?
No, it's still performing. Yeah, still playing with the band. I do the camps if there happens to be. I mean, I love it.
Yeah. And
there are a couple like this one that I kind of do regularly. It used to be I do maybe 2 a year, 3 a year. I think this year I did maybe 5 or 6. It just depends on our tour schedule, though,
Okay.
Like I've been playing in, doing the camp in Germany, the Bluegrass Camp Germany, for, I think this was the 5th year I did it, but I won't be able to do it next year because we're booked for a festival.
Mm-hmm. Is there a lot of bluegrass in Germany?
There is. I mean...
By a lot, it's a relative thing.
Yeah. But there are a lot of people who enjoy it, and interestingly enough, I mean, those rhythms are very similar to what they call the upa bands,
Going back to the accordion.
And the polkas, and,
Yeah.
And Bill Monroe recorded the heel and toe polka, and
and he had an accordion in
he did
his
it
band.
one time, yeah. So I think they can relate to that groove, quite a bit. But there's some good players over there, yeah.
What are the things that you most get asked at camps like this? You see a lot of students. What do they tend to gravitate toward?
Wow, there's a lot of. One of the most common that usually comes up in every camp is backup. What do you do for backup? Because that's the one thing that really is such a felt thing. You can study some of the licks and you can think about down the neck and up the neck, and when do you go down the neck and when do you play up the neck, and
there aren't too many tablature books out there that are backup.
There are a couple,
right.
Yeah, but and even then, when you have it, it's just how do you use it, and that's the trick, I think, and a whole big part of that is just listening. You really have to listen to the music so much. If you drive somewhere and you're listening to the music, and then you get there, you just want to play.
Yeah.
But sometimes you have to really take the time then and think about what did I just hear, or what catches your ear, and then go back and really try to think about what did that player just do that really...
Making sure that you're helping the music and getting in the way.
And how you select what you play when and all that. And that's the cool thing about playing the music,
Yeah, absolutely.
And then people worry about their styles, and I think... it's that's just so subjective, and I used to worry about that, and I make up these tunes that I thought, oh, wow, this will be really different, and then I'd go try to play it, and I couldn't play it, just because I was just thinking too much.
What do you mean? You would write a tune that you couldn't actually...
I would write a tune and put together the pieces, and it might have been something that was just... made no sense musically. It was notes, it was pattern, it just wasn't working. And then
wasn't as good as you thought.
No. and then then I started thinking, and when you hear even about the first generation folks, who they listened to or what they did as they were creating the first generation of the music, I think if we listened to Blue Ridge Cabin Home together, listened right through the song, no matter what band or person was playing banjo, I'd probably say, well, I thought that D lick was cool, and you'd probably say, oh no, that G lick, in the second chorus was cool, and so you start self-selecting the stuff that you think is cool, and then you learn it, and then you start playing it, and pretty soon your style is emerging.
Style.
Yeah. And so I tell people not to worry about that, because they're going to end up doing that anyway, as you choose what songs you want to play or sing, and as you choose what players you're going to listen to, it all influences, how it comes out of you.
Yeah, that's I've actually had that discussion on this podcast before, that if you maybe take one of your solos apart, you could probably point at where you got each of those little pieces, but when you put it together, it's just Greg Cahill's style, even though it's a bunch of borrowed or stolen snippets.
I mean, and it's Scruggs. I mean, how many times he did that 1,000,000 times, and if you listen to any of their recordings or live shows, whatever, you wouldn't think, oh God, he's used that like so many times, because each song is different and dynamic differently, and maybe in a different key, which is why people try to play don't do 10 songs in G, right in a row or whatever. But as you start mixing it up and put a different lick before it, a different lick after it, it just, but a lot of it is, if you learn a certain stock D lick or G lick or whatever, and you just start building on that, you can do all right,
Some mixing and matching.
Yeah.
For sure. So speaking of you teaching, I know Trishka has probably gotten sick over all these years about being asked about how he used to teach Bela. You are at least somewhat responsible for unleashing one of the monsters on us. Noam Pikelny was a student of yours, right?
He was.
Talk about what he was like as a student, or did you identify pretty early what his talent was?
Oh, from day one.
What was that all about?
Well, he had already taken some lessons from a few different guys around Chicago.
Okay.
And he had already been playing, He was maybe 15 when he came by me. And it was one of the times I was on the cover of Banjo Newsletter, and he read it and said, wait a second, he lives in Skokie. I live in Skokie. Oh, my gosh, we live in the same town.
I'm going to see him.
Yeah. So he called me up and said, think I could come for that? I said, of course, yeah. So his dad would take him and sit in the living room, while we'd play through the stuff, and then pretty soon after that, for a while, he'd ride his bike over and just play one of my banjos. And he was a great player right from the start because he knew his Scruggs stuff, and he was a good player, and he had paid attention to timing and clarity and tone. I mean, he was really a great player when he came to me.
By the time he was a teenager.
Yeah, and
wow.
he was just asking for thinking outside the box, because he had seen Don Stiernberg lived even closer to him than I did. Don was a stone's throw away from where Noam lived. They lived in the same town of Skokie, and so that's what he was asking about. What are some of your approaches? And after I don't know, maybe a little over a year, he would come religiously. He was learning all this Bela stuff then. That's when all that was emerging big time.
What, like the Drive album, or after that maybe?
Yeah, both. Okay. And after. And he just came over one day and said, played this thing, and said, yeah, am I doing that right? I said, well, I'll tell you what. You sure don't need to come here anymore, and I'll show me what you did.
Start paying him.
Yeah, it was just he just had it, and you could tell right away. Yeah. And he worked at it too. He was dedicated. He practiced.
So I was really hoping that you would just tell everybody the magical words of wisdom that you spoke to him that would instantly transport us all into that. But
just the P word. Practice. That was,
excellent.
Yeah.
I do want to ask, why do you keep your strap over one shoulder? Why are you one of those guys? Is that just what you've always done?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Truly. And this story is totally true. Everybody was doing it because Scruggs did it.
Yeah.
And Crow did it. And so we just did it. And then I got used to it, but I did rationalize. I've put it over the other shoulder, but it just feels different. And it's probably ergonomically better for you, for your body.
Yeah.
Because I end up like that, But it's just easier to move in and out of a mic because with over one shoulder, then
you have more.
I can just slide it over and still be playing backup and not be playing into the microphone if I'm singing,
Oh, yeah.
It's much easier to maneuver like that to me. I don't have to turn my body. I just slide the banjo down just a little bit, and it's away from the mic. Then I just with my.
That's as good of a reason as I've ever heard because.
Yeah.
Of course, then it comes back to what did Scruggs ever say? He just did that so he wouldn't have to take off his hat to put it on and off. And
when he'd pick up a guitar,
everyone's copied him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's totally the truth. Yeah.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
Okay, man. Well, I'm not going to take up too much more of your time, but I really appreciate you sharing.
Thanks, Keith. I enjoyed it. Yeah, it was real nice. Thanks for doing this to get more people to hear about the banjo. That's great of you.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Definitely my pleasure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, have a great weekend. I'll be seeing you around, of course.
We'll see each other plenty. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for everything.
Thank you. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast with special guest Greg Cahill. Just as a reference, you can track Greg down on the line at specialc.com. That's just special, then the letter C.com to find his band and everything that they're doing. As a reminder, you can also support the podcast at patreon.com/banjopodcast or email the show at pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com. I hope you subscribe and I hope you keep listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.